Yesterday, you reviewed poetic elements in the Raven. Today, let's check for understanding on these poetic elements before we move on to take our test. The first poetic element that you reviewed was internal rhyme. Internal rhyme is defined as a rhyme involving a word in the middle of a line and another at the end of the line or in the middle of the next. So it's a very lengthy definition. Let's kind of see how it plays out in our example. Your line from the Raven said, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary." In this line, I know that both words dreary and weary rhyme together. And if I look back at my definition, I can see that it does fit the definition of an internal rhyme because I have a word from the middle of the line that rhymes with a word at the end of the line. The next thing you were to do after identifying the poetic element was to see what it suggested about the narrator. To do this for this particular line, I do need to know what some of these words mean. So dreary means to be dull, bleak, lifeless, and depressing. Weak means to lack strength. Weary means to be tired due to an extreme lack of sleep. Based on all of these words and this textual evidence, I know that here the narrator is both mentally and physically tired. So now we have to ask ourselves, how does internal rhyme help us to figure that out? Well, by rhyming with each other, these words draw attention to themselves, and we really pay a lot of attention to them. So this internal rhyme here makes us really focus on how the narrator is both mentally and physically tired, and later it'll show us how he's dealing with his grief and serve as a reminder for that. The next poetic element that you looked at was alliteration. This is the occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words. So our line from the text said, "While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping." So here I have three words that all start with the same letter and are connected to each other, or right next to each other. So nodded, nearly napping, all start with N, and they're all right next to each other. So they do meet the criteria for alliteration. From this particular line, we know that the narrator is trying not to fall asleep. Other examples of alliteration occur throughout the Raven. Another example occurs when it says, "Surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore." Here, the S repeats. Alliteration makes us read the line faster, and it can help put emphasis on a certain phrase. So when it wants to know the impact of alliteration on the text, that's all we would say. As it puts emphasis on a phrase, it makes us realize here that he is tired, or later on, it draws attention to his grief. And it also makes us read the line faster, which in the Raven can be due to the fact that the narrator is slowly becoming more crazed or falling more into his imagination as the poem goes on. The next poetic element you were to look at was assonance. In poetry, this is the repetition of the sound of a vowel in non-rhyming stressed syllables near enough to each other for the echo to be discernible. Now this sounds very complicated, but all you're looking for is that vowel sound repeating. Now realize that it doesn't have to occur at the beginning of the word like alliteration does. So we can have the phrase, "and the silken sad uncertain rustling of each purple curtain." And I know that an example of assonance is the word purple and the word curtain, because we have the URs repeating there, that vowel sound. Now, Poe uses assonance throughout the entire poem to influence the way you read it. At times, assonance makes you punctuate each word. For instance, he says, "Suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone gently rapping at my chamber door." The A sound repeating makes you speak the word abruptly, and it really helps create that sound effect in your mind. Even though he's not used onomatopoeia here, the way that we say that word gives the impression that someone really is rapping. We're cutting it off abruptly. The last thing that you reviewed on the Poetic Elements worksheet was rhyme scheme in the Raven. So remember, rhyme scheme is just the pattern that the rhymes follow. So every line gets a letter, and if they rhyme, they get the same letter. So in this case, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary," we would give it the letter A. "Over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore," we would give that a B, since it's different from line A and it doesn't rhyme together. "While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping." Okay, this line doesn't rhyme with A or B, so it now gets a C. But we'll notice that the next three lines all rhyme with each other, and they also rhyme with the second line that we had. So we're following an A, B, C, B, B, B rhyme pattern. Because there is so much rhyme and repetition in this poem, the rhyme scheme gives the poem a musical, hypnotic quality. And this really comes into play again when the narrator is dealing with the supernatural elements in this poem, and he's also dealing with his own grief and the troubles in his own mind.